Welcome to Romera Records Virtual Cast. Today we have on Jake. How's it going?
Hey, good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I've found you from Podmatch. We were able to get this booked in, so I am curious. Actually, really seeing your bio and all the stuff on the website. From basically you kind of find a different way for salespeople to kind of have different conversations and different ways to approach things. So if you could, I guess, just kind of elaborate on what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in training and development for 30 years. I've trained in a bunch of different countries, a lot of people, probably I'd say 10,000 plus. And one thing I noticed during the whole time I was training salespeople and working with people is there was a constant repetition of the phrase, you need to communicate better. And I will tell you, out of the countries I've visited and the people I've trained, one thing I haven't found is too many places that you can learn how to do that. And it occurred to me that when we have a conversation, it's all revolving around the back and forth, the give and take, what I call the cadence of the conversation. And so I devised a method to actually improve someone's ability to have a strong cadence in a conversation. And this is like akin to your podcast. If your podcast was just all you or all me, it would be, I don't know, maybe not as interesting. But when we do a back and forth, it creates that give and take, that trust, that relationship that tends to spark not only something between you and I, but something between you as the host and your audience. So I've kind of revolved my career around helping companies do that.
Yeah, and I would go a step in to say that people who are good talkers are possibly good dancers as well, because it's kind of like, you have to know when somebody's done talking and you wait your turn. And, well, when I say good dancer, I mean dancing with somebody else, because
Right.
you have to know what your role is and be patient and do what you're supposed to do. And sometimes people, they, like some people they think too much like while somebody else is talking instead of just listening to the other person. Me and my wife were talking about that. It's a problem that some people have. Instead of just listening to listen, they listen to talk because they want to get their part in.
And Johnson, you couldn't be more right, especially to your point about the relationship with your wife. That's kind of our fundamental communication is with the people we're closest to. Friend, partner, spouse, parent, child, you name it. And you're exactly right. When people are thinking too much about what they're going to say next, they don't focus on the here and now. And that's another foundational principle of the 210 rule is it allows you to focus on what the other person is saying because my method actually builds in pauses where you can think about what was said, think about what you're going to say, and you don't have to spend that valuable time while you're listening thinking about what you're going to say next because it just naturally occurs during the conversation.
I would say it's also kind of like, when people talk about, you never really think about breathing, but when you talk about breathing, now you're thinking about like every breath you take. It's kind of like that.
Yeah, and it's funny because to your point, kids don't think about this, right? You hear two 5-year-olds talk. It's like, that's my favorite truck. Which one is yours? That's my mom. Which one is yours? I like black. What do you like? So it's a natural give and take and back and forth. So to your point, it's like breathing. We're born with this ability, but somewhere along the line, when we go on and we meet somebody for the first time, or we try to sell ourselves or our product, or we try to speak to an audience as a public speaker, we kind of lose it. It just goes away. And so, what I built my career around is trying to get people back to that method because its ability to build trust in relationships, to engage a public speaker with their audience, and for a salesperson to relate to the other person on the end of the phone is invaluable. And it's an art that I think unless we work on consciously, we tend to lose it quickly. They say Rome wasn't built in a day, and that's true, but it was certainly sacked in one. So we need to practice and get there and then kind of stay there and give time to it.
Do you have a method to where it's talking about, so for instance, the person speaking themselves, or is it the back and forth conversation?
Well, the beauty of the 2-10 rule is that it's for the speaker and for the listener. So if you're a speaker and you want to become more conscious of your conversation and how it's going, you can use the method. And if you're a listener, and we've all been on the other end of that conversation, right? Where the other person goes on for half an hour, you don't even hear them take a breath. So even as a listener, this coaches you on how to break in at points, to break the flow and get them to think and give yourself a chance to think, and maybe even interject a little of yourself to gain that interaction. So it's for the speaker and for the listener. And honestly, it's not two different skill sets. They're remarkably similar. If you learn one, the other one comes super easy.
Yeah, that's something that I've definitely learned is people who are great speakers are usually great listeners because they know what it takes to have the confidence and courage to speak, and so and they also know what it's like when people aren't listening to them. So
So true.
yeah, so they want to replicate that that generosity and say, hey, I was nice to you, I listened to you, so can you can you just sit there and listen to me?
I love your point, Jackson, because one of the basic human tenets of psychology is the need to reciprocate. Even police, when they're interviewing a suspect, they're like, can I get you a coffee? Can I get you a soda? And that simple gesture is designed to get that other person to think, well, they did something for me. Maybe I'll do a little something back.
Mm.
So, to your point, Jackson, when you're a good listener and you're hoping that being a good listener for a person is going to get them to reciprocate and be a good listener back, if you think back in history and you look at even the first Stone Age cave drawings, it's fascinating because they drew those pictures not just for themselves, but thinking other people were going to listen to their drawing. Artists, people who take photographs, they want people to listen to their work. So the need to have people listen to you and be acknowledged is as primal as the breathing we were talking about earlier.
Do you talk about body language at all? I know that can be a big thing when it comes to speaking to people.
Yeah, I have a background in neurolinguistic programming, which really focuses on eye movements, certain words that are said. And then I love to read books on body language. One of my favorite books is What Everybody is Saying.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like a basic primer on just paying attention to what is said by the body. Some stats put our nonverbal communication by 80% of what we say.
Hey,
So if you think that 20% is verbal, think about how much we lose in a text or an email or just talking to somebody by phone. You're missing 80% of their messaging.
yeah.
So human communication is staggering. And I think the biggest myth is that we all communicate well. I get asked by clients all the time, wow, you must be great at home. Your wife must be thrilled. You must be really good at this. Not really. Unlike anybody, I know the basics. I try to learn from my mistakes, but I don't think any of us are fantastic. We all have our shortcomings?
Yeah, and to your point, some people might be great at communicating in one way, but communicating with it depends on who they're communicating with and the environment, the setting, stuff like that. So those are all big factors. The other thing that I just did, the like ums and lip smacks, I do that a lot. Those kind of things. Do you talk about those and how to avoid which most people view those as negatives, but do
Yeah.
you talk about avoiding those and anything like that?
I don't address that specifically, no. What I'll usually do is refer them to a group that does focus on it. Things like Toastmasters International is a great place to go if you want to get rid of the ums. There's That's probably the main place I refer people. I do it myself. I still do it. There are times I will give an interview or talk to somebody and I'll think, wow, I did really good. Then I'll listen to the playback And you're like, I guess I didn't do as great as I thought I would. So, yeah, Toastmasters is a great organization for trying to help you get rid of those connecting words.
Yeah, and I've realized that that is something that if somebody doesn't do it, then I feel like they've been working on it because they're usually pretty good at just speaking.
Right,
Rarely is somebody not saying or like every 5 words, and they're a horrible speaker. Usually they're a perfect
right.
speaker. So, and then also people who do like a pause before they speak, they seem like they're more genuine with their words because they're taking time to think. Like you said that like when you first started talking, you were talking about people who just kind of pause, before they say something because they're thinking about it and they're going to try to give you the best message that they possibly can.
I agree with you. And I think there's a lot to be said for that pause. You're giving a message to the speaker and you're taking that pause yourself. What's really fascinating, Jackson, is that they took a look into this pause, psychologists have, and they found that Europeans are not comfortable with a pause that goes beyond 4 seconds.
Mm.
And they found that the Japanese actually pause as much to 8 seconds in a conversation without any discomfort. So it's almost cultural. And what's interesting is the theory. The theory goes that too much of a pause can tend to trigger fight or flight in the brain. How true that is, I don't know. That's one theory I read. But pauses can be a big thing with public speaking to get your point across or just to show that you're listening. But if it goes too long, it becomes a stressor. I found that fascinating.
Yeah, I could definitely see a stranger coming up to me and saying hi, and then and then just standing there and just looking at me for 8 seconds. Like that would be a
Yeah.
really long time.
And it's funny because that's what trips up some salespeople sometimes is they will ask a question of their client. And then if the pause goes more than half a second, they jump in and they answer it. So I think pausing really trips up a lot of people. And even though I've been talking about this for years, there are times where I'll be in a conversation, there will be a pause, and I have to fight the urge to say something. And I think it's just built in. It's part of the way we're wired. And a lot of it's the way we're conditioned. I talk a lot about human conditioning when it comes to communication too, because we're conditioned to do a lot of things that we're not even cognizant of.
That actually just happened to me in the last podcast that I was doing. I was talking to Victoria, that's her name, and when I was talking to her at the beginning, we're trying to understand each other's that, as I said, dancing. We're trying to understand that
Right.
cadence of how we're
Yep.
talking to each other. And so instead of asking her a question, I just kind of talked and then made a statement and just kind of made my point, and then I was just going to wait for her to say something. And again, this is virtual, so I don't know if she had lag or what, but she just kind of sat there for a second. I was like, oh, she's not going to say anything. So I just like started talking again. I didn't know if she was going to say something or not, but it was pretty funny.
It's kind of funny the way we go through that feeling out process. I was out Christmas shopping with my wife and I walked by another gentleman and our eyes locked. And I just nodded my head. I nodded my head. I said, "Hey." And he said, "Fine, thanks. How are you?" So he had a conversation in his head
Yeah,
that didn't take place, but he responded to it.
yeah.
And it's funny because, Jackson, that's how I got into this. My dad was a prominent businessman in the community, and he knew a lot of very prominent businessmen. And I was always amazed at how everybody started with, "Hi, how are you?"
Mm,
And nobody meant it.
mm.
Nobody wanted to hear a diatribe about how you were actually doing. And that got me fascinated with the human condition that we start that way, but it's almost like hi. It's you don't really want a response, but you do to at least acknowledge they heard you. It's just kind of an odd thing. And so I always tell salespeople and public speakers, when you start off with hi, how are you? You've already lost part of the battle. You need to rework that opening to reestablish a connection.
Okay, so I have a story about that. So I'm from Alabama and I'm currently in Memphis, Tennessee. And there was one of my friends, he was married to somebody and both of them were from Indiana. So one day, she was asking, she was like, when people say, how you doing or whatever here, do they actually mean it? And I was like, no. That's literally just saying like, hey, if somebody in the
Right.
South says, "Hey, how's it going?" They don't actually care about like how your life is going. That's just like saying, "Hey."
Yeah. I think it's funny you say that because I was talking to a person that was kind of a bigwig in the translation industry that did the translational tapes. So here's how to do English to Spanish, and here's how to learn German. And some of these translation companies now are basically saying, you have to get used to how are you? Because we don't do it as much here, but in English they do it a lot. And you have to understand it doesn't have a lot of meaning. So even these companies that work on, learning a new language are starting to say, kind of disregard how are you, or this is how you respond, but don't think they're actually asking.
Yeah, I mean it's all about, as you said earlier, like the cultural thing with the seconds. Like it
Yeah.
depends on where you're at, and who the people you're around. What they do often, and even like how the Indiana girl, she was talking about the Southern people. Like that is also like the difference between Northern people and Southern people. Like Southern people are very slow. Like everything we do slow paced. People drive slow. Like, hey, you want to go out? Yeah, we'll go out later. They're not trying to do anything right now. But Northern people are go, go, go. And I
Yeah.
mean, it's not everybody in the North, but this is just a difference in the culture. So that, and it could be talking as well. If I meet somebody who talks really fast, I assume they're from the North or somewhere else other than the South, because I'm just used to a lot of people who just talk slow and stuff, because I've lived in the South like my whole life, so it's just a difference of culture.
It really is, Jackson. And we call that localization of message. So if a New Yorker sells to another New Yorker, it's going to sound much different than if a New Yorker sells to somebody in Savannah, Georgia.
Yeah.
So that localization is super important. And you can call it tempo or whatever you like, but the reality is you have to sell to the tempo and to the almost lifestyle of the person that's on the other end of the phone. And that's a big part that I think is missing with communication too. So we tend to communicate with other people the way we'd want to be communicated with. And that can certainly lead things astray. My daughter just moved down to North Carolina not long ago, and we've always lived in Connecticut and Pennsylvania. And she said, Dad, it's like a completely different world down here. I said, they're going to have to get used to you. She goes, yeah, this is crazy. But yeah, it can be quite a showstopper for people from the north to go down south, and I'm sure vice versa.
Absolutely, yeah. So is there like a different like steps or anything that you take people through? Is there's like a whole process through it?
Yeah, so the 210 rule is named that because you need to create an interaction with the other person at a maximum of every 2 minutes. And at the end of every 10 minutes, you kind of want to take them back through it and say, man, we've really been going on. Any questions so far? Is there anything I can answer for you? And during a talk with a friend, you're not going to phrase it like that, but you're going to just review what has happened. And that's all based, Jackson, on a very simple thing. For every 10 minutes you talk or present something, you generate approximately 2 minutes worth of questions in the person you're talking to.
Mm.
It's kind of one of those unknown stats that can mean so much. So when I use the 210 rule, I say before 2 minutes is up, make sure you've talked to the other person and gotten their input on something, anything. And then at the end of every 10 minutes, just make sure you kind of review and summarize and make sure there's no questions or misunderstandings. Because what that does is that constantly level sets you through the communication. And an objection I've heard is that isn't that overkill? My answer is no. I've been doing this with people for a long, long time, and nobody ever says to me, "You listen too hard. You let me talk too much." So it's never overkill. It's actually flattery for the other person that you're asking for their input at such a regular time span. And the honesty is the 210 is just police tape around how far you should go before you do it. You can create an interaction every 30 seconds or a minute and regroup every five, whatever you want it to be. But the whole point is, Jackson, that unless you establish a cadence and start to build that trust and let them know they're going to be listened to, whatever you have to say doesn't matter. So cadence trumps content. And I've seen this happen time and time again. I've helped companies 3x their sales and increase customer service ratings by 1.5 stars just by following this simple method. And I teach them how to do it. How do you create an interaction? How do you do it effectively, especially without the other person knowing it? How do you wrap it up at 10 minutes? And we talk about empathetic statements and eliciting information without asking questions. So, yes, it's a whole process. And frankly, there are my share of people that I stick with a stopwatch and say, if that's heading towards 2 minutes, you better be asking them to say something. Some people pick it up in a couple of days. Other people I work with for weeks and months and never quite catch on.
Mm. You kind of alluded to this while you were talking, but do you have some like rebuttals from your clients who are like, that doesn't work for me, or that won't work in our case, or something like that?
Yeah, one of my favorite things that I hear, and this is mostly from CEOs and COOs of companies I work with, is they will say to me, my people don't have that problem.
Mm.
I'm good. Our customer service has a great rating. Our salespeople are generating sales. So I don't ever argue. I say, just do me a favor, call your company. Pretend that you're interested in buying your product or pretend you have a product complaint. Interact with your people and then come back to me and we can talk.
Mm.
I would say probably 8 out of 10 people come back to me and say, okay, you're right. So I don't ever try and give a rebuttal. I try and just let them understand that you may not see it as an issue until you become attuned to it. And then all of a sudden you understand. And then I have a conversation with them the way a sale should go or the way a customer service call should go. And inevitably they go, wow, I think I talked more than you did. That's right.
Mm. That these aren't actually related, but it actually reminds me of this. I think it's a YouTube channel called Cut, but they were asking couples how often they have sex, and they would ask them separately, and their answers a lot of times were completely different. They'd be like,
I'm sure.
"Yeah," they were like, "How many times do you have sex a week?" And one of them would be like, "Oh, like two or three times." The other one would be like, "Oh yeah, like 10 times a week." And it's like, if you're only having sex with each other, how do you get that wrong?
Right. Maybe they're only having sex with each
Yeah,
other.
yeah. So it's crazy. Like when you were just talking about how a CEO might think, "Oh yeah, we don't have that problem," and then they find out they have that problem just by calling their own company. It's like, "Oh, I guess we do," but they might just be disconnected because they don't talk to those people all the time.
Well, and speaking of being disconnected, it's almost a disconnect between maybe a CEO or COO. I don't want to point them out as the bad guys or bad gals. It could be a disconnect between them and what they think and what their customer service team thinks.
Mm,
You know, I could go to a customer service person and just say, just show them you care. Give them the white glove treatment. What does that mean?
mm,
You know, what it means to you could be distinctly different than the person that's doing the customer service. And one of my favorite things I hear from people is, well, they're salespeople. They should just sell. Selling is like any other art form. It takes work, and you don't get better just by being told you should be better. I saw a t-shirt the other day that was hysterical. It said, it was a little conversation on the front. It said, get better. And the other person said, I'm not sick. And the first person said, I know, but you could be a lot better.
mm.
So even those type of things are little foibles. I'll give you another example. I was just on a cruise with my wife and two of my daughters. I have four kids. So I was with two of my daughters and we're at dinner. And the one daughter says to the other, after dinner, I am thinking pool, bar, dancing. And my other daughter says, oh, that is such a great idea. I'm going to go back to the room and get changed. My first daughter goes, well, why are you getting changed? She goes, well, we're going to swim in the pool. And the first one goes, no, I meant I want to go to the bar, play pool, and dance.
Mm.
So even between two people that have grown up together, those little misinterpretations take place. But because they talked back and forth and got it cleared up, it was different. But imagine had they both gone off in their own direction after that conversation. One would be waiting at a pool table, the other be soaking in the pool, and
Yeah,
they'd get together 3 hours later wondering where the other one was.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Yeah, I mean those little, little things of just of knowing your people. Like if
yeah,
you are a manager and you're just not familiar with the people you work with, then you might be putting somebody in a situation that you didn't know that they can't handle. There's a guy that I've worked with in the past who was known to be a drinker, and we
oh
would have,
boy.
yeah, and we would have days where we were like, he's not here. And then we'd be like, wait a minute, what day is it? It was like, oh yeah, it was a holiday yesterday. So so he's not coming to work today, or he's gonna be late. So those are like, small little things. Like you wouldn't put that person in charge of something that's probably important because
Yeah,
even if you know they shouldn't mess up, they should not do what they've been doing, they're probably going to do it just because of tendencies. So just being in
yeah.
touch with people and having a good rapport with that person, and just communicating, like those things can make a world of a difference in your managerial skills.
Absolutely. And you notice that there are times where people would be promoted to manager and they don't necessarily have that skill set right away. So they need to be taught that skill set and help to change to that manager position. And when you look at communication, think about how huge this is. I mean, it's not just a company issue. We're in an election season. And look at every headline. So and so said this, so and so tweeted that, so and so didn't remember this. It's all about communication.
Mm.
So when we look at it and we say it's not that important and it doesn't apply to me and my company, it applies everywhere. I fundamentally don't understand why it's not something we all work on each day because of the importance of it. But my personal belief is, like I am too, you kind of take it for granted. I can talk, people know what I mean. So we're good, right? But man, it is a fundamental principle I think we all just need to work on every day. And that's hopefully what I help people do. And I try to do myself is get better every day.
And what you were just talking about is something that I was about to ask you is what you're doing is almost PR. It's people's ability to, like, the CEO or manager or whatever, they might not think they have and we talked about this earlier, the different kinds of people you talk to, you might have to change how you talk. Um, you might not think you have a problem talking to your employees, but if you get a camera or a news or like a journalist in front of you, you might screw up and you might say the wrong things. Have you ever had to go into that in your process? Like, hey, if you're talking to, people like news reporters or something like that, like speak in this manner, be careful of these words you say or anything like that.
Well, one thing, I don't speak with anybody high level enough that they're in front of the press. I speak with a lot of small businesses, typically 200 people and less, because I find they're the most willing to try and adapt and make significant changes like this. But one thing I do see a lot is a company CEO or COO that will have town hall meetings with their company. So they'll have a Zoom meeting with 200 people. And when you get in front of those people, you're kind of pulling the curtain back on who you are and how well you can communicate.
Mm.
You know, until that happens, you're kind of that or woman behind the curtain that runs the company and had the vision to do it. But once you speak, you're revealing your true self and who you are, and how you run a town hall and how you talk to your people is crucial. So that is one of the things I individually coach entrepreneurs on, is how to project yourself, how to put yourself out there in a way that's A, non-threatening, B, inclusive, and honestly, C, forms a community. Because you need everybody to be under the umbrella that you're a good communicator. As soon as you don't, it can start to have issues with your direct reports or even the people on the front line. Look at Undercover Boss. I don't know if you've ever watched an episode, but I love that show.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen a boss yet that hasn't gone, what's going on down here? I have some people that are not doing great, and I have some people that are just stellar and need to be moved up. If I talk to a company owner, I try to encourage them, your company's no different. You can't see everything all the time, but there are things you can put in place to try and mitigate issues like that. You communicate well with your direct reports, and then they communicate well with theirs. It definitely has a trickle down effect.
Yeah, that they were on. Whoever thought of that show was was on.
Genius.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
everybody knows if the boss came down to wherever, they were going to have issues, and it'd be a boring show, and it wouldn't be a show if
Yeah.
everybody was doing what they were supposed to all the time. Because the boss would be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is what I thought, but that doesn't happen ever.
No, never.
I think it's something about people just I don't know not having to deal with the people above like way above them. That kind of disconnect is something that I think some people they might either work better or worse because
Right.
if they have two levels above them around them like I guess just monitoring them or whatever they might be nervous or they might work better you just don't know and some people they think differently they might think differently they might act differently they might talk differently and it will affect their output because if you want somebody to be working efficiently as possible, you might need to leave them alone because they might work better that way.
Yeah, you're dead on. And I'm going to mangle this quote, but I believe it's anthropologists that say that anything is observed and it knows it's being observed will not act the way it normally does. And again, I know I mangled that, but it's basically to say if someone knows they're being watched, they're going to react differently than if they're not being watched. And we're seeing that a lot now with the pandemic and people working at home and doing their own thing. You're finding out who the real workers are and who they aren't. And I don't mind publicly saying that I think the companies that feel that if they bring them back to the office, they're going to react better, they need to refer back to the whole anthropologist thing.
Mm,
If you have people that you don't think are doing well, get rid of them,
mm.
but don't punish the people that are working well in an effort to recoagulate them in the office environment. And I know that the reasons are much deeper than that. I guess what I'm saying is that it goes back to the point you were just making. Those observed are going to react differently than those who are not.
Yeah, and it might just be the simple case of those people generally just work well when they're not around other people. They just might be a loner type personality where, not saying that they're a bad teammate, but they just can work better because they're not worried about what so and so is doing. They just work better alone. And some people, they need to be around other people to work well because their brain gets scatterbrained when they're by themselves. Like sometimes silence can be much worse than noise for some people. Like they need some noise around them. They need somebody talking or something because it actually helps them concentrate. So it just depends on the worker. And as you said, COVID definitely shine light on people's their work ethic and how they approach things, because when we had these people working from home, they might not have gotten as much work done, and
You're right.
they probably felt like, hey, I can get away with this. Like, this is great.
Yeah.
And they just keep it going.
Yeah. Yep. No, you're right. There's people both on the good and bad side of the spectrum, 100%.
I do think that when you were talking about how people, uh, just not punishing the people um, who actually are doing well by themselves, that has got to be, I would say, kind of demoralizing for a company. Like, they were talking about like Apple and I think it was Microsoft or somebody. They have these massive facilities that they created for people to come to work, and then
Yeah.
everybody was like, "Why do we need to come back to work? Because we've been
Yeah.
doing well from home." And it's like, "Oh, well, you need to come back because we said so." So now it's kind of,
Yeah.
you've built kind of a bitter relationship with your employees and employers at that point. So that can be kind of tricky. So that's why I say you would need to create a great environment at your workplace and great relationships between your managers and all the employees, so that people will be like, yeah, I don't mind coming back to work. I like being at work. I can focus well. Everything, we all interact well with each other. Communication is good. So yeah, that's something that you would want to create to avoid that whole, pandemic situation where people just didn't want to come back to work.
Well, and Jackson, you bring up an interesting point with communicating that out to them about them coming back to work. I have a friend of mine that was separated because he wasn't going to move to go with another company. And he said a vast majority of the communications regarding it were written
Mm,
emails. And if you think about how much we misunderstand each other when we can see each other and it's strictly a verbal back and forth, think about how tough that is with email. One thing I tell all my clients about communication is you don't write your text, you don't write your email. It's written in the head of the person reading it, and it's seen through their lens.
mm,
So it can be the most well meaning thing ever, but it can be taken as an atrocity, an affront to the person, and something they don't care for. And with the email, you don't give a way to respond. I am a firm believer that if you have more than a couple of sentences to write, it should be verbal.
mm.
Because as soon as you go beyond a couple of sentences, you're inviting in misinterpretation. And there could be the argument that, well, we don't have the time to call all those people. I think you do. That's why you have managers below you, and that's why you have managers below you, because it's their job to communicate it out. But to put out a mass letter saying you need to come back and then getting hot and bothered because people aren't responding well, maybe you should have thought about how to communicate that out better.
I'm all about making predictions, and what you just said just made me think about something. I predict in the future, Microsoft, yeah, they already have like Bing and everything with AI. I predict they're going to have like video or voice emails, and you're going to get to choose the, I guess, personality or trait, how to relay the information that you're putting in your email so that people don't mistake something. So you could put like, do this in a serious tone or say this in a humorous tone. That
Hmm.
might be something interesting.
Jackson, you may be onto something there. Maybe you
Yeah.
should patent that real quick before it gets out to anybody.
Because I mean, you're right. Like, if past a couple sentences or so, it doesn't matter what they're saying. So, for instance, I was having to travel somewhere to do a job, and my boss asked me like, "Did you stay until this time?" And I didn't stay. It was like a certain time period, like late at night, and I didn't stay until that time because one, I had actually came to work early, and so I was going to leave a little early, and then two, the time that I had traveled, I was taking care of like two different locations. So the time
Okay.
that I had traveled was going to be the time that it would have been for me to actually leave at the time that he asked. And
Oh, okay.
yeah, so I was like, what would have been the point? I would have traveled back just to leave there at the same time that I usually leave. So that wouldn't
Yeah.
make sense. So his question, when I heard it, when I, when I read it,
Big difference.
when I read it, I was like, why is he asking me that? Like, no, but like to me, it just came off kind of, I don't know, not condescending, but along those lines of like, you didn't do what you should have did, but it's like, yeah, but all these other factors that come into play. So yeah,
Yeah.
just whatever, and that was just one sentence. Like,
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And you look at keywords and how they can affect you. If somebody writes you an email that says, "Why did you go over there?" In your head, you're like, "Oh, why'd you go over there?" Or "Why did you go over there?"
yeah, yeah,
You write it in your own head, in your own tone, based on the mood you're in. And if I just won the lottery, I'm going to take that tone as great as can be. Where if all my kids are misbehaving and there's brand new stains on the brand new couch, I'm going to take that email ugly, regardless of what you thought you were writing.
yeah.
But we're in this age now where emailing and texting is preferred because nobody is comfortable talking to each other,
Mm,
or you've just lost the ability to do that because you haven't done it in so long. And you can hide behind that text or email. I'm not criticizing text or email. I use it all the time. But if there are certain communications that need to go back and forth a little bit better, I'll use a loop video, or I'll use another thing that has a video provider where I can send them a minute and a half clip. They can see me, they can see I am or am not upset. It's I think the video emails and texting, or using a video with your text, is just a step up, a real step up.
yeah. Do you use are you using Apple phones like an iPhone?
Yes.
So that when they started adding like the voice message, I was like, oh my God, this changes the game. Because
Bonus.
yeah, because one, you're able to say more, but like if you're still a busy person, you're like, I don't have time to just talk on the phone, but I can send a voice message right quick and then
Right.
do what I need to do. And that way, this person isn't going to take what I say wrong because they can hear the tone of my voice and I can
Yeah.
get out a whole thought instead of sitting here and sending a text message. So that was a game changer.
Yeah, it really was a game changer. And so are the little video clips you can send. With a lot of people that I work with or refer to, or they refer to me, video clips is how we go back and forth. I'll send a loop video, or I guess another one is boom boom, whatever they use, it doesn't matter. We do video clips back and forth. And it's fun. It's hysterical to do that, and you really get the meat of what they're saying. But yes, I agree with you. The videos are great. I saw Facebook Messenger lets you do that, and you can do it on your messaging on your text. So yeah, reduce misinterpretation, put your voice out there, or better yet, put a video of yourself out there.
Do you feel like there is any other like technology or any kind of advances in ways that companies or people have been able to communicate that have helped your company, helped you be able to work with people?
Yeah, I think the videos are probably the biggest thing. I'm a little concerned, Jackson, about the AI from a sales and customer service perspective. Either A, it's not there yet, or companies have really swung so far in the direction of it that it may be more detrimental than it's worth. and I'm not speaking for people who know AI well and can program it well. I'm talking in general. And I'll give you a good example. I bought a big product the other day online, and I was talking with a representative online. And after I made the purchase and I gave my credit card and completed the purchase, I noticed a distinct change in our communication.
Mm,
And I thought, I was converted over to an AI bot. So I wrote in, I said, "Where's my representative?" And the bot came back and said, "They've moved on to something else. I'm here to help you now. I
mm,
will never buy from that company again, ever." And it's a big ticket company.
yeah.
But if you're not thinking that I'm worthwhile enough to connect to a human, I have an issue with that. Maybe it's my generation, and I can accept that. But what a lot of companies are not taking into account is that Gen X and the baby boomers have the largest amount of expendable income on the planet. And yet they're the ones everybody is frustrating with these types of things. So if you're doing AI for outreach or you're using it to produce a message for somebody who hits your landing page, booyah, go for it. Best thing ever. But talking to a customer about something that's personal to them or a purchase, I'm just saying I'm not sure if we're there yet. We will be one day, but are we there right now? I'm not so sure. On LinkedIn, I get dozens of direct messages a day that I can tell are just AI generated email sequences. And I have no time for it. I delete every single one.
So I will tell you a quick story that I just watched on YouTube yesterday. So the way the music industry works, if you just decided to start making music today, you can use these websites called DistroKid, CD Baby, and TuneCore. Well, DistroKid and CD Baby have a pretty good reputation, but I saw this video yesterday about TuneCore where this girl was saying that she got an opportunity that there's I think a famous singer named Grime, but Grime, she was allowing people to use her voice via AI. So like, I guess you can type your own lyrics and then use
Hmm.
her voice to make a
Oh,
song.
wow.
But what you had to do is you had to sign up with TuneCore, one of the distributors, and use their distribution website to release your music. And you had to buy a whole year subscription to do it.
Gotcha.
So what people were doing, they're like, "Oh, okay, that's awesome. I can use Grime." It'd be like if some famous, like the Beatles or something, you could use their music or whatever. So Grime, she allows people to use a voice, but you have to use TuneCore. So this girl, she makes this YouTube video, and this is a going bad. This is a
Mm-hmm.
complete video.
Mm-hmm.
So what she does, she buys a whole year of TuneCore, and then after that, she makes the song and it gets sent in and Grime approves it. Like she gets an email from TuneCore that says Grime approved the song. So then once she's like going through the process, ready for everything to get released and everything, she gets another email from TuneCore saying they decided not to release her music. TuneCore themselves decided not to release her music. That's not how that should work. It's not like a submission playlist. It's like, hey, I paid you money, you do what I tell you to do. It's like a grocery store.
Right.
Yeah, it'd be like Walmart telling you, nah, we know you just bought your groceries, but we don't want you shopping here. They don't
Yeah.
have the right to do that. If you buy groceries, you can just buy. They can't tell who, unless you were like disturbing the store. They can't tell you
Yeah.
you can't shop there. Well, that's what TuneCore did. And they tell you that you can't get your money back because of whatever situation. So the girl emailed them and said, like, hey, I didn't get the rules and regulations for this. Can you tell me like what I need to do? And she got an email back saying, sorry that you weren't able to, give the right information, but at this time we're unable to assist, blah, blah, blah. She was like, this is a bot. And then she emailed
Yeah.
again, got the same kind of response. And then she went on X to tweet about it and found out other people were getting this same problem. So
Oh,
TuneCore was
man.
just taking people's money, thinking that they were going to get this opportunity with Grime, and they were just getting bot emails back to them. I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
how did they fumble this customer service situation?
Yeah. That's terrible.
And I think that if companies are going to rely on that, then that it's going to really show who the good and the great are when it comes to customer service. I think Apple does a pretty good job, and they're like at $3 trillion of revenue right now. So
Yeah. Yeah.
companies like them, I think, will be all right. But all these other companies, if you're not having good communication with your customers and just using AI, it's not going to do well.
Well, this brings up another point, Jackson, is we're so willing to invest in new technologies like AI and things to reach out to customers. But the reason a lot of companies do that is to become more efficient and save money and cut back on customer service personnel. What I don't understand is why don't you invest your money in getting your sales better?
Mm.
Why don't you invest your money in training your salespeople to get better with people on the phone and generating more revenue so you can afford to do the things you want to do versus saying, oh, sales aren't so great, so we really have to cut back and we have to bring these things in. I'm not saying that's the only reason people bring in AI. I know it's brilliant and it's incredible and I use it myself. But it seems to me we're losing the root cause of why some of this is taking place. And that's in some companies, the inability of the salespeople to relate to the customer and generate the revenue so that you don't have to worry about cutting back in certain areas. Does that make sense? And I know that's not everybody. I don't want to say this is a sweeping statement, but in a lot of people that I work with, this is the thing. So I'm willing to spend the money to fire somebody and rehire somebody else and spend all the onboarding costs. But I don't want to spend an extra couple of $1,000s to just train my current people and get them better at communicating. It's a weird thing.
Yeah, it's just basically the difference between being proactive and reactive when it comes to dealing with those kind of situations, honestly.
And it's a weird math equation. Sales companies will typically say, we close one out of every 100 people. So to close 10 people a day, I need to have 10 people making 100 calls apiece. Jackson, we don't think of anything else in life like that.
No.
I don't think to find my soulmate, I have to go meet 356 people. I don't think to go to get the best deal at a shopping center, I have to visit 12 Walmarts to make sure I'm getting the right one. We don't think of anything else in those terms. And yet somehow sales, which is a brilliant art form, some of the best orators I have ever met are salespeople. But we look at that and we say it's a math equation.
Yeah.
It's not. It's a relationship equation. And you and I both know you can't reduce a relationship to math. It's art, it's science, it's constant work, it's constant practice.
Absolutely. Well, Jake, let's wrap this up. It's been great, absolutely great talking to you and getting to know all the things that you do and how you're helping people create better conversations and develop better relationships with their customers and within themselves and their company. Could you give everybody like socials or websites,
Yeah.
book, whatever you've got?
First, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This was very kind of you, and you took valuable time out of your day, and I appreciate that. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm just at Jake Stahl on LinkedIn. And then I have a website, jakestahlconsulting.com. Those are the only two spots you can find me. So it narrows it down as to when you can see me and how you can get to me. And I think it just makes life easier. For anybody who's listening to this show, if you're genuinely interested in personal coaching or you have a company that you feel could benefit from the coaching, I'll give you a free 1 hour consult. You and I can talk for an hour, see if it would be a mutually beneficial relationship. If it is, we could talk about moving forward. And if not, at least we both made a new connection. So I'm more than willing to put that out there. As for my 210 rule, I have a book coming out. I'm hoping it will be out in the summer. It's going to be called the 210 Rule: Why Cadence Trumps Content in a Conversation.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on, and it was great talking to you. And thank you for everybody watching, and we'll see you next time.